We're gonna get going. So good morning, everyone. Welcome again to another edition of our monthly GPN speaker series. So this morning we are very pleased to welcome, I would say, a GPN speaker series regular, Dr. Wraychel Gilmore. Uh, Dr. Gilmore and I met at a conference a couple of years ago, the Comparative International Education Society conference. And it immediately struck me that we had some intersecting interests, especially in youth empowerment, and particularly, I thought, in youth political participation and from an international comparative perspective. So I thought, wow, this is just kind of a nice intersection of interests, and it would be great to have her as a guest sometime on the speaker series. So this was a good time to do it. So I'm
Mhm.
really happy that she was available this month to be our guest. And so usually what I do is I hand it over to Mike Nicola, who is co-founder with me of the Global Possibility Network, which is hosting this event. But he's actually in China right now, and he's participating in some pretty important meetings with the Secretary of Education, Minister of Education. I'm sorry, I don't know his title, in China, on some of these very topics of youth empowerment and youth agency, youth development. So, in any case, I'm going to hand it over now to Dr. Gilmore to take it away and regale us with her knowledge on this particular topic. So, Dr. Gilmore, thank you and welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew. This is what I love most about our community of child and youth advocates and scholars and practitioners. As you mentioned, Andrew, we met at a conference initially in Miami, and when you just resonate with people of like you're working on the same things I'm working on, we have the same values, and you initially just want to stay connected with each other's work. And then we found ourselves crossing paths like this in the cafeteria at Cornell at a UNESCO conference. Went, hey, what are you up to now? And it was at that time I was sort of finishing my dissertation. I was leaning more into full-time consultancy work and really taking ownership of this branding of being a renegade in the sector, of sort of not going with the status quo, but finding mechanisms within our system to take ownership of it and really drive youth voice in the decision making of all the services that impact them on a daily basis. So now I situate myself as, a college level educator. I'm a professor of two courses of early child care development. I am a public media voice advocating for youth political involvement. My book is coming out this year. We're going to unpack sort of all of these avenues that have spawned from being, a term I really didn't hear till the end of my academic journey was an activist academic. Being able to take the PhD experience out of academia, back to services, which was my intention from the beginning. I just didn't even know the language for it. So, I'm going to share a deck here to sort of guide the conversation, walk us through. I'm definitely going to leave lots of time at the end for dialogue and conversation, which is what makes the Global Possibility Network so rich and why I love logging into these conversations every month. You never know who's going to show up. You never know what colleague you're going to connect with or reconnect with. So there'll be lots of time to chat amongst ourselves. And yeah, we'll take it from there. So give me the tech moment to share my PDF. And Andrew showed me. Oh, it went right into full mode. Isn't that awesome? Wow, let's see if it's gonna work and everything. I'm so happy. I am not the tech person.
Well done.
Thank
That
you.
was smoother than many transitions. So nice job.
Thank you for the trial run prior to
You
our
got it.
guest arriving. So, as I mentioned, I've branded the work I do in all avenues under this terminology of being a renegade, and really being a social justice ally. I have my own lived experience in certain arenas, but clearly not all of them. So I position myself as an ally in the academics that I've done and the advocacy work I do now. So to give the academic cred and for those who are, I know like Erwan, you're considering a PhD journey, this will be a good sort of overview of the research methodology and adventure that you need to go on. the front end will be a little academic heavy, and then we'll get really practical as we get into the advocacy work. But, this is my academic credentialing. I did my PhD doctoral work at the University of Toronto at OISE, the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. So it's sort of the biggest, baddest education department in the country. And for our American friends, we like to say that U of T is the Harvard of the North, right? We have to have some affiliation to you in the United States. So that's how we identify ourselves. But I identify myself in a lot of ways, a lot of hats that I wear now as a consultant, a mom, an author, a partner. I bake. That's a lot of stress relief. I like making laminated pastry. But I've been a board president. I've been a union rep. I position myself when I work with my clients by saying I have actually sat on all sides of the decision-making table, from executive positions to government. And, I've founded a school. I've been an appointed legislative assembly officer for a child and youth advocate office on the East Coast of Canada. And I throw a little one in there as a giggle. I'm also now identifying as a passenger princess. Does anybody know the term passenger princess? No, this is
Please,
this is
please inform us.
it's fun because I had a conference just recently in Prague, and it was a generational divide of who knew this term. And so a passenger princess is the one who sits in the passenger seat of the car and, maybe takes photos of the scenery, has their little latte, gets a drink for the driver, and really doesn't worry about too much. So this is a new identity for me, and I include it in my cluster here because I used to identify as a road warrior. I used to drive 250 kilometers a day just to execute my routine and feel very independent and strong about that. But I put this up as a marker to share that we are all capable of change. And even things as strong as our identity, we can change what our focus is. So in positioning myself in the sector as an advocate and a consultant and a leader, a thought leader, this is sort of my logo soup of organizations that I've served, worked with, consulted for, led, built, been on boards with. And I find this to be a really intriguing exercise that I recommend everybody, take time on a Friday afternoon and do and create this visual. I actually co-presented with a youth advocate and last fall, and he was really anxious about putting together this slide for himself. And he's like, "Oh, but there's no way I have as much experience as you," kind of thing. But we sat down, and all of a sudden we had his university affiliation. He had sat on a national advisory youth committee, not-for-profit NGO. He had just started an internship with a senator, and he filled the page with his own logos of associations that he had in his life. And it's amazing to see how we all connect with each other when we sit back and actually think about how we serve the sector. And we don't do this alone. I have to position this by saying there's no way I could survive the advocate and consultant life and the PhD journey without the loved ones at my side. And so in color here, we have the team of us, my friend who's in robes beside me, Emily, she calls us the PhD Dream Team. But we were the COVID cohort that started at U of T in our adult education and community development program, to which is so wide and broad, you can drive a truck through it. And when we started, faculty called us the most eclectic group of students and cohort on campus because we were all coming from the sector with different experiences in our professional life. And just to demonstrate the rigor of our program, there's only 4 of us standing there 4 years later. 19 of us started. The washout rate, the attrition rate is atrocious. So to look at our journeys and think about those of us that moved across the country, moved across continents, faced protest on Indigenous land during, COVID, dealt with elderly family members, dealt with divorce, dealt with parenting and caretaking. Like the misnomer is that we're often told, don't enter into a PhD until life is settled. Life is never settled, right? So you do it anyway, you band together with those around you, and you survive. My survival team is there beside me in black and white. That is my daughter June and my partner Farzad, and that is a very stereotypical picture of us, our personalities. And they physically put food in my mouth, built my chair and desk, championed me when I came home from campus and lay flat on the living room floor because I had no mental capacity to even move or make decisions. Going into this type of process where you examine your work, you examine your values. I've said in other talks to other students considering this type of graduate work and this level of commitment to advocacy, it sucks your soul out through your nose. Like you really put yourself through the ringer to stand on business of what you are committed to. And you cannot emotionally and intellectually do that alone. So find your people. Find your people. Because I lit my fire in the belly of where I wanted to go with my PhD studies based on this pivotal moment I'm showing you. And in this image, a youth who was living in a group home situation during COVID was part of a youth advisory committee with me for the legislative office of Prince Edward Island. And at the same time, as we were sharing news items every Friday, wrapping up the week about things about human rights, children's rights, youth in the news and media, the story popped that Canada was appointing our next ambassador to the UN, and it was going to be Bob Rae. And Bob Rae had actually served as a former premier of Ontario, had met with youth in care previously, I learned after the fact, and when the youth told me, they're like, hey, well, this guy in the news that's going to go to the US, sit in Manhattan and talk about our rights, he should hear from us. And I kind of took a gulp and went, okay, I will try to make that happen. Let me just call the newly appointed ambassador to the UN and see if he'll talk to 8 youth from the East Coast of Canada. And you know what he did? And he zoomed in on a morning. He was barely establishing his office at the Canadian Mission. You can see his flags behind him. And we stood in an arts facility boardroom that was comped to us, that had the tech that we could set up, that each youth could come to the camera and say their bit. And we'd done prepped. We'd used the UNICEF child-friendly report on the last concluding comments that Canada had received on the UNCRC. You know, we had some structure to how youth were going to share their perspectives and what was important to them. And Paige walked up to the camera, and she's given me her blessing to share this story many, many times. She loves hearing where I've taken her story around the world. Paige walked up to the camera and put her script down and said, you will have no idea what it's like to be a youth living in care in a group home during the pandemic, being sexually assaulted, having no one believe you, not have a phone, away from your family, and have no friends to talk to. And it sucked the air out of the room. And that moment, Bob Rae, our new ambassador, sat back in his chair as you see him. He put his hand up to his face as you see it, and he covered his mouth even to silence himself. And it was a physical act of listening. And when Paige was done, he took his hand down and he leaned into the camera and he started to tell her about when his brother died in his 20s. And he had his own mental health crisis, fell into depression, became alienated from his social fabric of his community, and didn't listen to the adults around him and his own father about the help that he needed. And this moment for me encapsulated what I had seen for 25 years working in child and youth services, bringing young people into consultations with decision makers, with politicians, with high-level people who typically had no idea what was happening in the lives of youth, as Paige was describing. So I looked at it and went, that, I want to figure out what made that just work so that I can bring that back and tell people about it and go, this is how we make it happen. This is how we can engage and talk and share and learn with each other. So we can get rid of these tokenistic youth engagement sessions that are just for social media, that are just, you know, for the press release, just for the photo op. So, to look at the big academic structure, I had to name this thing. So my dissertation became titled Conditions and Factors of Adults Learning from Youth, How Informal Adult Learning Can Occur During Youth Political Consultation to Support Policy Development and Human Rights Adherence. You have to make your research question. So my main research question was, then what are these factors and conditions? What are they to necessarily create youth political consultation? How do we make it happen? And of course, you have to say this is why my research is important. Youth by the factor of their age alone are the people who are usually excluded from policy processes, right? Just because of how old they are, not even all of those other intersectional elements and factors for their identity. Age alone, chronological age, keeps them out of the room. And I stuck this sort of little reminder in there of how challenging this topic was. Even within my department, the Premier Education Advocate Department of Child and Youth Services in Canada, this was a challenging topic because I was bristling up against the concept that youth could actually be experts in their own lives. That I knew from my own experience, youth.
Hi, Rachel. I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, June, you killed my audio. I'm back.
Okay. I'm wondering maybe we could just take a beat. We can edit this out.
Oh,
But
sure.
maybe starting from,
This slide?
yeah, if you don't mind.
No problem.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So I put this additional little excerpt in just as a reminder that even at the most, premier education academic environment in Canada, this idea that I was challenging who an expert was, that I was bringing forward research to demonstrate that youth can be experts in their own lives. They can lead lessons in human rights at federal political tables and impact the decision makers. Even after 3.5 years of this journey, a member of my own dissertation committee, a faculty member who he's an international leading expert in adult education in the workforce. He sat in my defense. And, in the second round of questions, when they get really bristly, and he said, so I've got like a 12-year-old and 14-year-old niece and nephew. I don't think they're experts in anything. I scanned your dissertation. You use the term lived experience 87 times. You use the term ex subject matter expert like 48 times. Do you really think they're experts or not just evidence? And I'm like, you okay. Right? Like this idea that we can still in 2025 think that a human being is um, evidence because they're young is disturbing. So I share that was even part of my challenge of bringing this work into academia to advocate for youth voice, that even amongst advocate academics, I was still up against a brick wall. Because I was arguing very adamantly and started to support through my lit review, youth can share their lived experiences about growing up in child protection services, experience education disruptions, the realities of food insecurity, and the inability to access mental health supports, just as the tip of the iceberg. Morally, I was arguing that, Canada's capacity to uphold youth participatory rights is part of our commitment that we've ratified in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. We actually have a moral treaty international obligation. That usually falls flat with politicians. They're like, yeah, we've got a bunch of those we don't adhere to. So I'm like, okay, practically, youth can actually offer us as advocates, as policy writers, even as adult learning theorists, a framework to increase our understanding about what youth political consultation is and what's happening for that informal learning for that adult when they're having to listen to marginalized people. So I expanded my review of literature, looking at, sort of the top obvious one being youth participatory action theory. It had yet to turn its attention to what's happening for the adult. It's hugely focused on youth, but in order to serve the youth, we've got to look at what's going on for the grown-up. In Canada, our Supreme Court had even called us out for saying we're being discriminatory in our political practices, that we're marginalizing citizens. We're not listening to them. So I'm like, okay, there's a space and place to have this conversation. We need to. When we look at the UNCRC itself as youth and child advocates, we know it's Article 12. That's our participatory rights, where children and youth have a right to be part of the decisions that are made about them. It is one of the most quoted elements of the UNCRC, but it's often the misunderstood one. Grown-ups hear this, adults in positions of power hear this, and they think, well, I have to give up my decision-making authority. That's not what it's about. It's about shared decision-making. So my adult education theorists, like my friend on my dissertation committee, you know, they've looked at things like informal learning, but not when the teacher is a youth. Even the intergenerational learning theorists, they mostly have focused on the workplace and go, okay, what about when this generation comes to work with this generation, Gen Z, millennials clashing, all these different value expectations. But in this case, there's a massive power imbalance because the adult is being paid for their time. They're employed, they're elected and appointed into that position. The youth are doing this out of their own goodwill and volunteer capacity. So there's a massive power imbalance that I'm looking at in terms of youth political consultation. So to my actual study then, I looked at doing a qualitative interview study. My point was hearing people's stories. So I was basing it on these 25 years of experience that I've had in the sectors of child and youth services, as I mentioned, education, human rights advocacy, and being in the room, the fly on the wall, and the facilitator of a lot of these political consultations. I conducted 23 informal, semi-structured interviews. You sort of have to plan those questions in advance. Surprise, they all went out the window. And we actually just had a conversation. And I conducted a lit review. I looked at, as I mentioned, youth participation elements, consultation in general in Canada. Again, surprise, we suck at it. And these informal adult learning theories. Now, I asterisked down at the bottom there for you the idea that I actually added 3 more interviews when I was getting ready to write the book version, the trade publication version. And those 3 additional interviews just sent the narrative to a whole new level. So hold that thought because we're going to come to it. So to have these conversations, I looked at meaningful spaces in person in Ottawa. It's our capital. If you're not familiar with Canada, for our American friends on the call, this is our Parliament Hill. It's called the Hill. It's literally, part of a swamp with a river. And then there's like this lovely buildup of Ottawa. This is our main central building. I had, of course, coffee shop meetings across Toronto, as we do in the charitable and not-for-profit sector. We solve all the world's problems over a coffee in a cafe. And virtually across Canada, being able to talk to folks in the north, in Calgary, on the East Coast, just for the practicality of where and when people were available. And the surprise was, normally in this kind of research, especially universities, they're worried about confidentiality, ethics conflicts. Everybody just adamantly waived confidentiality. They said, use my name, use my position, use my title as an act of advocacy to amplify the work, to bring attention to it because the people I were talking to cared so deeply about youth being involved in political decision making. So that first group that I talked to were the elected and appointed individuals. So this is a plethora of individuals who include the ambassador, two senators, their staff, an executive director of the Prime Minister's Youth Council in Canada, MPs at the federal level. And I do have two individuals who did maintain confidentiality in this group, one of which did say, you can share that I am young, female, and racialized. And it is for those reasons, and she used the word, I fear my identity being disclosed because of what I want to be able to tell you. So that could be a whole research project unto itself of the idea of privilege and power and being able to use your voice publicly. And then I had my second group, these adult allies. So these are colleagues and peers from across all of Canada who have worked in similar fashions that I have in terms of being facilitators and allies to make youth political consultation happen. And I did have one individual in this group fearing for funding repercussions, fearing for job security issues that maintained confidentiality within this group to be able to talk so openly with me. So all of them, when I looked at them as a collective afterwards, these are really a subgroup of people within our sector who are either politically appointed, elected, or as leaders, but they share this history, this passion and this knowledge bank of experiences. I mean, I heard the same story multiple times from people about like, well, do you remember when we took that last group of youth to the United Nations and then it went so badly and they belittled them for racial issues and this went like, there's kind of like these Super Bowl stories that sports fans tell. Like, remember that play that year with that team? It was the same with these group of adults I was talking to. They remembered these occurrences, these instances of youth political consultation. I mean, I had a former child advocate in Ontario, Irwin Elman, and I had Bob Ray, the ambassador, both tell me a story from 30 years ago about youth political consultation when a young person in care said to Bob Ray, who was premier at the time, like, you know, this $600 you're giving us a month to live on when we leave care, it's not enough. What are you going to do about it, Dad? And that dad moment of saying, I know you are legally my guardian. You are my parental unit. You're responsible for my well-being to transition to 18 years old and independent living. So these kind of moments in our collective shared history was what came really apparent in the stories that folks shared with me. And it was all founded in values, these beliefs about how we can truly actually listen to young people and how we can and should conduct these meetings with them. So I expanded my lit review. I started looking at child advocate reports. I was looking at what was coming out of the Senate, more in the media. In Canada, again, the Hill Times is like a big political newspaper. UNICEF documents. We have a Canadian, coalition on the rights of the child group, our Indigenous federal affiliations. I looked across the gamut of who's doing what and saying what. Social media even, right? What organizations are putting messages out that are being publicly consumed. I found myself with over 125,000 words in transcripts that I had to do something with. And so I started to code them. I looked at thematic coding. And this is where I got to the point in my academic journey where I thought, this whole qualitative versus quantitative battle, I was ready to fight anybody who said that qualitative was not as rigorous as quantitative. Because when I was going to sleep at night, seeing color-coded bars of things that my participants had said and quantifying it, I knew that I had rigor in what I was discovering. I was looking for these patterns. I wanted to find the motives that were reflecting the beliefs that were coming through with what these adults had learned. So let's look at some actual data samples. What did people tell me? And I will premise, if anyone's offended by some strong language, there is a bit of strong language in here. So my first one that I'm sharing is this quote from Terence Hamilton. So I'll read it to you with his connotation that he spoke it to me with. The fact that the federal government doesn't have the internal capacity, they employ thousands of people across the country, and they don't even have a small team of, again, this just speaks to the lack of professionalism. They don't have a small team of experts in youth engagement. I mean, ideally, ministers would have at least some capacity to engage children and youth on policy issues on an ongoing basis, right? This is a basic bare minimum that Terrence is asking for from our civil servants. And as interesting sort of, afterward follow-up, Terrence was the right hand to Lisa Wolf, one of our country's leading policy experts working for UNICEF for over 30 years in her position. Terrence worked with her over a decade, and he came to the conclusion and he shared with me, and he said, Canada doesn't even want people like me anymore. And he put an 18-month plan in place and relocated his family to Geneva and took a secondment to work for UNICEF there. So the fact that some of our most vocal, adamant policy, child, and youth rights experts don't feel like they have a place in our country anymore is slightly terrifying. To Senator McPhedran, her demeanor, I want to have her adopt me as my professional grandmother. Senator McPhedran has this demeanor of grace and just calm. You sit in her office and she has this tea set, a bookshelf full of knickknacks and memorabilia. It overlooks our capital. And she looked at me and she said, Wraychel, like, we've become an old country with a democracy that's in crisis. The mobilization and the agency of youth in this country is one of the most predictable, reliable pathways to revitalization of our democracy. And one of her acts of advocacy is every year she has sat in the Senate, she has introduced a private member's bill to lower our voting age in this country to 16. She knows it will never pass before her mandatory retirement at age 75. She's already identified successors of younger senators to keep introducing it because that is how long it takes to impact systemic change. To my senator who is a little bit more colorful, this is Senator Stan Kutcher. And for context, his previous work before entering the Senate was actually as a medical doctor, as a psychologist and psychiatrist in specializing in youth mental health. So he knows his stuff. And he said, I've learned through my previous work, I'm not going to make mistakes that I see my colleagues making. And they either don't know they're making mistakes or they do know and they don't care. And I'm not sure which is worse because they know fuck all about the kids they're bringing in. Coming to the Senate, I was appalled, and I mean appalled with capital letters at how people use evidence to inform political decision making. I realized very quickly that I couldn't do it without active and engaged participation of young people. So everything that I and my team did was informed by and in collaboration with young people. So we have this. We have this passion. We have these type of allies sitting in powerful positions. We need to activate them and leverage and support our work. And lastly, to the ambassador, I came back around full circle, did an interview with him specifically on all these issues. And the humility that he demonstrated became a core theme of my findings. And he said, listening really requires being willing to accept the fact that you can be wrong and that your first take on the situation might be incorrect. But it's not about just simply asking people, well, what do you want? It's also about explaining what you think and then saying, tell me why I'm wrong, or tell me what else we should be thinking about. So that level of humility from someone who has climbed the ladder of political diplomacy right up to the top level of being elected as the EXOC president and now just retiring literally this week is remarkable. That's the kind of, factor and condition we need present for young people to be listened to. So in findings, nobody could agree on what a successful youth political consultation looked like. Some people said just having it, that's the win. And others said, well, no, they should expect results just like adults do. So we can't even agree on what it looks like. And just as a nod, as I don't have too many youth photos in this presentation, there are my little Canada cookies that are actually called Obama cookies. And I love having this conversation with a shared Canadian American audience because these are sold at the market right beside our Capitol Hill. And they're a traditional, little maple iced Canadian cookie. And I have eaten more of these with young people from across the country who have flown into Ottawa to do political consultation. But because when Obama was your American president, he came up and did a photo shoot eating one of them, they are now actually called the Obama cookie. So thank you. You took that from us as well. So my findings came out really in these two parts. We need motivation to activate youth participatory rights, right? We need the fire in the belly. Then we need to look at, are the conditions ripe, and what are the factors that have to be there for those adults to show up in the way to listen? When it comes to the motivation, it's about, are we actually curious about the person sitting aside the table from us? Do we have a bit of a rebellious renegade attitude to say, I'm putting this on my agenda this week? These aren't constituents, these aren't taxpayers, but I'm going to listen to this group of young people. The humanity to have some patience, because it's not going to be a normal meeting, and the humility to learn stuff you may have never learned. The professionalism to do this and fight the patriarchal system. I get invitations all the time to come and speak and join a protest or a rally or to be, somewhere where there's a strike for labor. I don't go. I don't accept them because I think that those acts have a place in our society. But for me, my style of being a renegade is I want to work within the system to make the system better rather than say it's broken and let's blow it up. Conditions of youth political engagement, those that are trying to do this practically, the briefings. Everybody talks, oh, we always do the briefings, we share who's coming, but we really miss the boat and have non-existent debriefings. Youth never find out after the fact what happened to their voice, what happened to their opinion, did what they contribute mean anything? Did it make it into the report? Are they included in presenting the findings? Are they editing the recommendations at the end? That's where we're dropping the ball, right? So the role of the adult ally to make sure that happens, to not just facilitate the moment in the day, we've got to bookend it, beginning, middle, and end. Because that learning environment where that adult is hearing from young people, guess what? It's usually not the drop-in center. It's not the needle exchange. It's not the youth employment center. It's the boardroom. It's the conference center. It's the political office. It's in Ottawa. So already the environment is the adults. The least we can do is give the professional courtesy to the young people to tell them how the meeting went after the fact. So the adults, when they were telling me about why they bothered to do this well, they talked about their own opportunities they had as young people, not necessarily adversity. We think those of us who work in advocacy and child and youth services, we all come from, trauma and adversity. And yes, that might be part of some of our narratives, but adults actually told me about, hey, this one time I got invited to present to my mayor, or this one time my principal at my school changed a school rule because me and my friends took it forward. They talked about how it felt when another adult had given them a chance. This idea of not being a decision maker. I mean, I had folks as high as senators and our ambassadors say, oh, but Wraychel, I'm not the decision maker on that. Well, then who is? I'm sorry, but I call for a little bit more accountability, right? If you are within this system, you absolutely have power. You absolutely have capacity for enforcement. Because guess what? You already have privilege by being in the room. Who's absent, who's not there, is absolutely impacted by social economic status, race, gender. This idea that youth to be in the room had to have a national perspective. Well, who has a national perspective? I've traveled all over the world. I still have not been to every province and territory of my own country. So do I represent a national perspective because I've never been to Saskatchewan? Right? But we expect that of young people. It's not fair. But it boils down to adults always say young people are effective when they communicate authentically. We know that's the win when they use their own voice. So obviously, there was some limitations. I have my own bias being in this sector so long. I have my own privilege, being white, being female, eliciting emotional responses from people, being educated, being a professional who's held the roles that I've had. There's also legislative barriers. I only had so many capacities to talk to the notion that youth in care often are barred from these consultative opportunities because we can't reach them due to privacy concerns, right? But there are ways around that. There are ways to invite them to the table. And so going forward, I think one of the biggest things we always need to be mindful of when we engage youth in this way is the emotional labor they're putting into it, right? Retelling their stories, retelling their perspectives, and what that takes out of them, right? So building in the debrief time, building in the decompression time, right? The time to, like, I had one youth in Ottawa once, that bakery closed, the cookies weren't available. All she wanted to do was take one home to mom, right? She was getting on a train for 3 hours. She just wanted to show mom that she had had boots on the ground in Ottawa. You know what? We knocked on that door so long till the bakery staff came out of the back and opened it and got her the cookie to take home to mom. Because that's what she needed emotionally to show the pride in what she'd accomplished that day. Sometimes it's just a cookie. Okay, to wrap us up, so we've got time for conversation. This truly is work that is an emotional investment. There's ups and there's down. We need our heart and we need to make sure we don't get too despondent. That notion of unless. So if anybody remembers Grace Lee Boggs, she was an American political activist long before Malcolm X, long before RBG in the Supreme Court. She actually tried to get Malcolm X to run for Senate. But she says all of this social activism goes back to an epistemology that is not just of the brain, but of the heart. An epistemology of compassion that recognizes how we belong to each other, that we recognize we are each other's harvest, we are each other's business. And I truly feel working in this sector, this is where we're falling short right now. Locally, nationally, globally, we've forgotten that we are accountable to each other for each other's well-being. And then I start to feel, that conspiracy theorist idea of I've seen too much, I know too much, I'm aware of too much. Everybody know who this guy is? Yeah, Andrew's nodding. He's our Lorax, right? He's Dr. Seuss's Lorax that has like seen what's happened to the trees, to the air, to the water, to the fishes. And I feel like this was my mental image as I finished my research. And I just felt like, really, unless someone cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. That just rung in my head. I'm like, we got to keep standing on the tree stumps. We got to keep giving the speeches. I had another advocate in the sector. She worked with human trafficking at borders of women in sex trade. And she said to me once after a talk, she's like, get used to talking over and over and over and over again to very small rooms, right? Because our topics don't bring in 200 people at a time. It's like we have today, right? There's half a dozen of us willing to give the time and energy to this. When I had a course offering at the University of Toronto on children's rights and research, how many students registered? Four. Four. There's 20,000 grad students at U of T. Four gave a poop about children's rights and research. So accountability and actions. I stand on the mantra that we are the system. And I have developed very finite policy recommendations, many of which are not new. They've been around, they've been called for a long time, right? And I believe that this civic responsibility to each other, this accountability at all levels is what we need so that we can create a more socially just national approach in all of our countries to our decision making when we include young people. So my policy recommendations, just in general, about themes about them, focused on time and money, that we need accurate scans of data, coordinated reports. We need to professionalize youth work, not even in terms of credentialing, but just valuing it in society. When somebody introduces themselves and says they're a lawyer, they're an engineer, they're a doctor, we respect them. What about when they're an early child care professional, or they're a teacher, or they're a youth worker, or they're a child protection worker? Do we feel the same way about them as the engineer? No. That is culturally our problem. I then unpack about 9 legislative strategies, things we could actually do in law, low-lying fruit, actually, that could be changed to really impact how children live their lives in our country. Overall, I advocate endlessly that people in positions of power need to actually talk to young people. I love asking that question. When's the last time you talked to anybody under 18? And they're like, and it might be, well, my neighbor's kid or my cousin or like I have a nephew. I'm like, okay. Like, did you actually talk to them or just say hi? Right? Like, I challenge that, and we need to normalize that young people have a place in this political decision-making arena because it's only with this more learning as a country and a bit more humanity that we can get the necessary systemic change we all know is needed. And a little nod to my Lorax friend, just maybe. So this message, I love this slide now. I've actually done the count that even in the last year, there's been over 30 countries of individuals that I've connected with to share this message, have been in my audience for keynotes in person. I've found myself in Greece, in Hawaii, in Spain, like in Madrid. I just came back from Prague, as I mentioned. I'm talking to a colleague in New Zealand for next year. There is appetite to push this renegade mentality and kind of say enough is enough. And young people really need a voice in some of these decisions, or we all know as experts in the sector what this is going to look like 10 years from now. We know the ramifications. So I have, taken up arms in terms of being very vocal. Even this past year, I have had 2 op-eds published in a major Toronto newspaper, which is a national distribution. It's the Toronto Star. I went right at our cabinet structure when we abolished 4 roles that had social service portfolios, including the minister that served children and youth. And then our budget that has just come out and actually is being voted on today in our House of Commons completely guts any support for children and youth directly, and any mention of them only monetizes them as a financial benefit for adults. There's no perspective in our political decision making that children and youth are deserving of services and budgetary allocations simply because they exist, right? And we do not do that to any other faction of our population except children. And I love that I didn't even pick this picture, but I love that the newspaper picked this image of our prime minister with these very despondent, disengaged, uninterested young people behind them. I'm like, actually, that pretty much says the mood. That's on point. Thanks. I'm like, I didn't pick it, but great. All of this is now balled up together. I am in throes of final edits. The manuscript's actually coming back to me by Monday for my final run at it. But pre-sales are open. I know, Andrew, if you don't mind hitting the chat, you can start to dump in a couple of the links I've got there. But renegade politics is the narrative from all of the 25 years I've had in this sector, combined with my dissertation interviews, combined with what's been happening since then in our political arena, as there's been more crumbling and erosion to the potential of young people being involved in political processes. So this is available for pre-order. It's out next year. And my lovely new friend, who I keep calling Sir, the ambassador, once I asked him to write the forward to the book, he's like, okay, but you got to call me Bob. I'm like, okay, Bob still feels really weird. I'm going to call you Sir. But Bob Ray has written the forward to the book. And a speaking tour has been guaranteed by a backer by the Canadian International Council So I'll be able to take this across Canada to multiple cities. And I've put in a funding proposal, fingers crossed, everyone, to the Max Bell Foundation to hopefully be able to host youth forums in all of those countries to be able to get the book in the hands of young people and say, this is how you can get your voice heard. These are the tips and tricks and stories from the past that we can learn from so that we can do better going forward. And just to give you an idea, I run through in my draft table of contents, like it really is about how youth can participate, how Canada consults, which is not good, and then looking at really the rooms of power, the legislature, the prime minister's office, the Senate, and then the reality check that rather than being listened to, youth die. And the shocking amount of stories that colleagues and myself have carried with us of young people who have died while in our service because of the policies that exist that do not see them and listen to their expertise, I had to include because I feel a moral responsibility that as academics and those who have power, we can write people into existence. And there was a few youth that needed to be written into existence, and they are there in those pages. So connect, stay in touch, join the renegade, as I say. I've got active channels both on LinkedIn and on Instagram. I think Andrew's putting my email directly in the chat as well. No project is too small, too big, global or local. I feel that I love to be able to connect with people where I know I can create impact and assist you in moving forward with any element of systemic change and social justice, specifically for young people and youth who are often the most marginalized. So with that, I'll stop, and I think we've still got our 15, 20 minutes to have a chat.
Look at that. Expertly timed.
Ooh.
Perfect. Thank you, Rachel. That was really informative, enlightening, lit a fire under our butts collectively, I hope. For those of you here and also for anyone in the future who might be accessing this video. So I'd like to open up the floor to questions and comments. And I know some of you are off camera. Feel free to chime in off camera or join us on video. That's fine. But I thought I'd just open up the floor to any comments or questions. Yes, Altaf.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Gilmore. Appreciate your presentation this morning. And so what I heard this morning, you've talking a lot about, the work that you've been doing with youth and more on a focus at a political level, right? And I think you seems like you spoke largely at the national level, and dynamics at that level of government. And perhaps you can maybe kind of bring it back even to the most immediate local level, right? When we're talking about youth in care, children and youth
Mhm.
that are in care and their role. I certainly have certain thoughts from what I've experienced here at the Children's Aid Society and being in child welfare for a number of years, um, about what I would probably like to say some dysfunction between the voice of the youth, voice of the child, as it relates to even just the day-to-day casework activities. I'm wondering if you can maybe speak to
Mhm.
um, how those children and how those youth that are in, receiving child welfare services, how their voice can be better heard by, their workers, their caseworkers, even at the agency level there, right? And I'll leave it there
Mhm.
for now and see if that kind of we can sort of flourish on the conversation on that.
Absolutely, Altaf. Thank you so much for that because that's exactly what it is. It's about what is happening day to day for youth living in service, right? Whether it's
Mhm.
education, care, justice, incarceration, all of that. Like, what does that look like, and how can they be heard? And I mean, I've sat with youth, on the floor of group homes, on the floor of their private room in a psychiatric ward. And at that individual one-to-one level, like in receipt of a provincial service like child protection, honestly, I feel that the same necessities for their engagement are present that that exist at high level national consultative tables, right? Is the adult that needs to hear their perspective open to it? Are they
Yeah.
curious enough and willing to learn? Do they have some humility that just because this is the policy we've had for 10 years doesn't mean this is the policy we need to have for the next 10 years? That maybe the use of phones has changed, right?
Mhm.
Like that there was a great study that came from colleagues in Scotland where they heard youth voice about cell phone use, cell phone use in schools because teachers were like, "Oh, just, it's bad screen time, ban phones." And then the students came back and said, "Well, my phone is also my wallet. It's how I buy
Yeah.
my school lunch. It's how I
Yeah.
upload my homework on Google Docs." It's like, right? And adults just had no concept,
Yeah.
right? And even to bring it back to during the pandemic, I had a consultation with young people with the Minister of Education about the reopening schools policies. And it was about like, oh, at this phase, we'll have your masks in your locker. And this 12-year-old goes, um, but what if there's a fire drill?
Yeah.
Right? Like, are we all going to go to our locker and get our mask and then go outside? Like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And the Minister of Education is like, oh, so like, and that changed the policy to be like, no, you'll, at this phase, everyone will carry a mask on them at all times. Right? So for children in care, especially, here in Ontario, there's a lot going on. Um, and I think too often the barrier is legal privacy, right? Like I was just at a debrief of a report done by the Sonar Foundation. I don't know if it's trickled over to your desk yet. Oh, I have it here. If I hold it here, you'll see it. Have you seen this one yet, Altaf?
Not
Care
yet. No.
criminalization. Yeah, definitely find this. It's still, I think, in draft form.
Okay.
Um, but it is that intersect of youth who've experienced justice and care or care into justice, right? And I raised my hand even in that room and said, like, I'm really cognizant of all the adults here. We don't have any young people. We don't have any young people in care. And the facilitator, the fellow for the research, immediately went, oh, I was ready if somebody asked that question. And she pulled out her piece of paper and went, the lawyers advised us that we legally can't identify them. Da, da, da. And she was so proud of herself. And I'm like, it is 5 minutes
Mhm.
to lunch. Otherwise, I would like come at this full throttle.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
and I spoke with her and her board president afterwards. I'm like, there are gobs of examples of advisory groups that exist across the country that exist, I mean, even within a group home itself, how young people host house meetings, right? How their feedback can be heard to their workers if they're living in foster care rather than just that once a month check-in, right?
Right.
What do these processes need to look like that are more creative, that are more modernized? A lot of it, and I've had a lot of colleagues lately, Altaf use the term evolution,
Okay.
right? Instead of saying, oh, it's broken, it's wrong, we need to fix it, like it just needs to evolve, right?
Mhm.
It has come to a certain place. Circumstances have now changed. Now, what evolution do we need to nurture to have it continue to have some elements of efficiency going forward? And I think that's gentler language for adults who can get really
Sure.
defensive in
Yeah.
their positions of power instead of coming at them with like, well, we're doing it all wrong. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
like the social workers don't have enough time, they're not available. Like, okay, how do we need to evolve our services to meet the changing needs of young people today,
Right. Yeah.
right? It it's all about how you make people feel. And I find with advocacy, I can get fired up and ready to like, throw stats down and rip
Mhm.
jugulars, right? Like I'm ready to go toe to toe. But it's like, okay, like let's think about, did that person wake up this morning wanting to hurt children? Probably not. So let's
Right.
let's start there. Let's start with they're probably a decent person and maybe they just don't know this.
Mhm.
So how can we have them know this? Does that help?
Yeah, I think it's a good start, right? I think there's
Right?
multiple things that I think we can look at. I think there's a number of elements to this, right? I think, we talk about the busyness of a social worker. Of course, busy.
Hmm.
I think I would argue a lot of people are fairly busy, right? Um, but I would hate to use that as sort of the basis of saying, look, they're too busy to hear, or they're too busy to respond. I think if we do that as part of the larger advocacy work, I think we lose the plot here. I think this isn't something that should be predicated on someone's workload or someone. This is like your primary function is to assess, reduce, and eliminate risk of harm to children and youth.
Yeah.
That's why you're here. And so therefore,
Yeah.
you know, children and youth, that's the primary words in the mandate. So why don't we start actually from that perspective to say, okay, and so what does the child and youth want? And
Hmm.
reframe it from that perspective. So I appreciate it. And I hope that we can hopefully maybe even do a bit of collaborative pilot work to kind of look at changing this. I think that's something that even I think Lisa has a bit of an interest in there, right? On various things there. So I don't want to take up the full conversation. I probably
Okay.
talked to you about this for an hour over coffee and cookies, but I'll certainly let the other
We
folks here have an opportunity
we
to
will
speak.
find our coffee and cookie hour for sure.
For sure.
Absolutely. Great.
Hmm. Great. Thank you, Altaf. That was a great question and good conversation. I'd like to hand it over to Lushen.
Hey, thank you very much. Hi, I'm Lucian, and I'm a second year grad student here at Penn GSC. And I'm really appreciate your presentation today, and I really love the things you're doing because I also believe in the power of qualitative research and
Mhm.
storytelling and people connection. And also, I aim to be an activist academia in the future as well. So my question here is because I love the research that you did. And I also saw this news a week ago that Denmark set to ban social media platform for children
Mm,
under 15. And
mhm.
Mm.
although they might allow parents to give this dispensation for youngsters down to the age of 13 to access certain platforms, so the point I try to ask is because social media or like the online platforms are such a big social arena to talk about those stuffs. So I'm thinking, what's your take? What do you think about this national move, like for Denmark, or what kind of um what do you think about like social media as a social arena for youth engagement and things? Yeah, thank you
Yeah, I
so
mean, my
much.
my first question, absolutely, and thanks for the enthusiasm.
Mm.
My first question to Denmark would be, so what did the young people in Denmark tell you? Right? Like I would absolutely just first question, like, what was your youth consultation process? What demographics did you listen to? And, some people classify, youth consultation on an issue like that as like, well, we went to university campuses and talked to first year students. I'm like, okay, you're getting like a sliver of a sliver of a sliver of a privileged population and not understanding what it would be like for, say, like Altaf's social workers, clients in care, right? Who, your access to social media, if you're on an alternative education plan, you're not in a school community, you're working online, a lot of times like Instagram, like, because I mean, that's now the platform being targeted. Um, Youth use it as a DM mechanism. They don't text anymore, right? The DM is their iMessage. So, and they look at WhatsApp and go, I'm not touching that. That's for old people, right? Like, so, we have we have to stop and pause in these presumptions and not think that our protectionist mentality is what's right, because often protection is paternalistic, right? And I was sitting in a youth consult with Stats Canada. So it's our big national statistics, conglomerate government organization that makes all of our statistics happen. And youth had come in because, of course, it's a young person's issue to ask them about it's like sexual health, drug use, drinking, and social media, right? Those are like the top tier things that we consult with young people about. Heaven forbid they have ideas about, education policy or, justice, whatever. Anyway, so these young people come in to talk about, what age range would be appropriate to, provide education materials free through public health to young people about reproductive health, their sexuality. And, the adults, the statisticians around the table were like, do you think we could go under 18? Like they'd said something dirty, right? They're like, could we actually talk to under 18s? And this brilliant young woman, 16 years old, on the other side of the boardroom table just goes, well, you get your period at 12. So you should be mailing that survey to 12-year-olds. And the adults just went like, oh, like that would be so unheard of. And she's like, why? It's that, like, that's what you want to know about, like 12, 13, 14-year-olds. Those are the experts about how they feel about their body, their health, their reproductive, like how else, like to the 16-year-old at the table, it was just so dumbfoundingly obvious, right? Like you want the statistics to represent the opinions of these people. Why don't you just ask these people? So that is my long-winded response to how I feel about when governments make decisions about things that young people get to use or access or do. Did you ask them? How did you ask them? Who did you actually ask? And looking at the validity if they've done any youth consultation to see what that looks like.
Yeah. Thank you for your question.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I
So I'd
also
like,
have sorry.
just for the sake of time, because we have to wrap
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
Thank you again, Lushen. I'm glad you chimed in. Ling Yun, Zhao, or Vinita? Just thought I'd open up the floor if you want to chime in.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll
No problem at all.
right now, but like I'm
Not
pretty.
necessary at all. Just offering it. And Vinita, I thought I'd offer it to you as well.
Hi, I know I am late. I miss my professor message, but still I have a question. I am a EC student at Francois, and Miss Gilmore is my professor. But I am so fascinated by youth helping youth thing, and as my son is also a youth, I have a question, because I know we are running out of time. The question is that how can we help youth who may not realize the support is there? Sometimes they don't know, and sometimes they also know
Mm-hmm.
that there is a help, like mental health, if they are struggling. And but like still sometimes it's a taboo, and there is a fear, they are being judged and losing friends. So
Mm-hmm.
how we can approach them, to reach out to them, like we have lots of policy, lots of organization helping them, but still, grassroots. I always believe in grassroots, how we can start this thing helping youth, because I always believe youth are our future, and there's like kids are our future. So education and all the other support, we should provide them for our better country and better future. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
thank you so much for joining too. I'm glad one of my Fanshawe College students was able to make
Mm-hmm.
it. That's heartwarming.
Mm-hmm.
I think at the grassroots level, a really short answer to that, just given the time, is that when we provide the help, we have to ask if that's the help they need.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds really basic, but oftentimes we're like, oh, this is the 1-800 number you need, or this is the email of the person that could help you with that, or here's an organization you could go to. And then we think our job is done, right? And we don't ask the follow-up question is that going to work for you? Do you have a phone that you feel safe with using to make that call? Do you need a private space? Would you like to use my computer to log into your Gmail to send that email? Right? Do you need a ride to that organization? Can I get you some bus tickets? Right? Like we give the referral or we provide the service and we don't check if it's accessible or the right match, right? What if the youth comes back to us and says, I tried calling them last week, they hung up on me, or I tried going there, they kicked me out because, right? Like we don't know what the barrier is. So the follow-up and the compassion to make sure it's the right match is what I think is so necessary at the grassroots level. Just that extra bit of time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
Thank you for
I'm
that. Yeah.
I usually thank you and thank you for the question, Vanita. I usually try to squeeze in a question of my own before we log off. Last time we were back in October, we were everything was just going so the discussion was so rich. I didn't even have a chance, so I got to get in my two bits this
And
time.
I will stay on. I know we're at time for the recording and for
Sure. Oh,
our
thank you
commitment, but
guys. Thank you.
I
And
will
if
absolutely stay on.
thank you. Yeah, if you have to leave, no hard feelings at all. Sometimes we do go over a little bit of time, and I promise to keep it brief. Um, that said, I mean, your presentation brings up a ton to talk about, and you know, I've just been constantly attending to the specific points that you're making, but also kind of relaying them back to these bigger picture issues. And over again, I just keep on coming back to the idea that in so many places of the world, in the world today, there aren't, legal codified spaces for youth to have structural power, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think that that is a major challenge in this work because, Altaf, you were talking earlier about ways to promote engagement and to empower youth. It's been a constant theme of the talk today. But how much different would this look if there were a legal requirement that there be youth at the table, right?
Hmm.
So you have that.
Hmm.
Second point, just I'm going to make like three or four points, and then I'll be done. Um, I'm wrapping up my second term as a local school board member, and it's small potatoes in the pyramid of American politics. It's really like the base of, it's really the low man on the totem pole, so to speak. That said, it is usually the thing that people most care about, actually, is their kids and their school and their property taxes. This is an American issue there. But where I'm going with this is that even in our own local governance structure, we have student representatives on our committee um, panels, right? So I just wrapped up my last curriculum committee meeting a couple days ago, bittersweet. And
Hmm.
one of our representatives on the committee is always a student rep.
Yeah.
And so anytime we are talking about a curricular change, anytime there is a presentation about high level stuff about, we're buying this curricular package or we're doing this curriculum audit, et cetera, there's always the student there to ask what they think, right? So in other words, they are in the process, right? Now, an extra step would be to have a student as a member of the board, but that doesn't quite work because we're elected officials. And then you have rules about how young or old you can be, the age range of being an elected official, which is
Hmm.
another topic in itself, right? It goes back to what you talked about in the senators. So that to me is the overwhelming point, really, for me of like if I had to filter it down to one thing that threads across all of these topics, is how much are youth written into the law? How much legal empowerment do they have, right? The other issues are cultural. Some of
Hmm.
them are cross-culturally universal. Most of them aren't. So there are countries out there that have more of a cultural penchant for empowering youth, like in Finland, for example. There's lots of discussion about the Finnish education system. We could throw out other examples. I mean, one obvious example is from South Africa, that there was the ANC Youth League, that the African
Hmm.
National Congress recognized back in the early days post-apartheid that the ANC's victories had a lot to do with youth energy and voice and passion. Um, like you said, Rachel, I mean, the ANC Youth League, they were leading the ANC in very short order. Walter Sisulu, You've heard of a guy named Nelson Mandela, etc., right? So point being, like, what culturally are we doing to empower youth? Do we have a society that empowers youth, that is okay with power sharing intergenerationally,
Yeah.
doing things relationally that support youth, right? Just and final bit, that last example that actually you summed it up really well, Rachel, about 10 minutes ago. When you gave a perfect example there of how to kind of involve young people and then ask people in charge, why aren't you asking young people about anything? Why does it have to be about drug use or avoiding danger, right? Pregnancy and things like that, right? Like one quick example, sorry. So there's a survey that is administered every couple of years in Pennsylvania, where I live, called the Pennsylvania Youth Survey, right? PAYS, pays. And the first time on the curriculum committee, so we on the committee we get a report about the PAYS survey, right? And the first time I was given this report by the person within the district that is responsible for administering it and then reporting on it, I asked, so why is it called the youth survey when it's really just about youth drug and alcohol usage
Yep.
or things like that, right? Why isn't it specified? In other words, there's this kind of elision of, youth. You're thinking of youth, you're thinking of, okay, you're looking at how to make them less of a danger to themselves and or us, grown up
Mm-hmm.
in society, right?
They're a threat.
Right? It's this kind of profiling sort of put them in a box. So, as you can tell, your talk has inspired lots of thoughts to the point which I'm going to wrap it up. But hopefully, those are just some ideas to use or to think through. Thank
Mm.
you.
No, absolutely my pleasure, Andrew. And for anyone that wants to stay on, I'll respond a little bit to Andrew's thinking, but again, respect if people have to get going. But
Yes.
no, I appreciate the opportunity to, especially, the big part of getting this research out as a trade publication book, of being able
Hmm.
to publish it so that policy readers could pick it up, so that students like we have on this call can pick it up, so that professionals like Altaf can pick it up and want to actually read it. And that dry academic, boring required methodology crap is all out of there. And it's the narratives, the stories, and the recommendations. And
Hmm.
the book is focused heavily on exactly what you just honed in on, which is the legal enforcement.
Hmm.
What policies and what legislation can we actually go after advocating for alongside young people to say this will enshrine their
Hmm.
participation in these decisions,
Right.
right? And even one as a Canadian example, as a basic, is that like we've had the pendulum swing so far in terms of bothering to listen to young people
Mm.
even within the same elected party over the last decade. The
Mm.
Liberals, we had Justin Trudeau as our prime minister. We now have, uh, oh my gosh, Carney.
Carney?
There we go. It's Friday. Holy. We now have Carney. And we went from a prime minister who made himself the minister of youth and created the first prime minister's youth council so that he
Hmm.
would have an advisory group to tell him about all of these issues, not just the threatening bad ones young people experience, and regularly met with them in person,
Hmm.
interrupted because of COVID, and then interrupted by the political structure. He spent too much time on it, and I have lots of insider stories about how it was systematically taken away from him, moved over to another department in Canadian Heritage. Middlemen put it in the way. Literally, I have a story of his business card he was handing to a young person, and a staffer intervened and went, "Oh, no, 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 we have another inbox for your thoughts."
Hmm.
Right? Like wild to now a prime minister who got rid of the Minister of Children and Youth Services and begs the question, those in that circle going, are we even going to continue to have a prime minister's youth council? I've
Hmm.
interviewed like outgoing members of the current cohort who have been told to be on standby to maybe mentor a new cohort. Like so we can't even systemically, not even election proof from party to party, but leader to
Mm-hmm.
leader, attitude to attitude of someone who
Mm-hmm.
was a former high school teacher to someone who's a former economist and world banker. So if you don't care about young people, you don't listen to them. And so we can't
Mm-hmm.
even, as a country, enshrine that. I mean, the other dialogue that's happening right now is also in our Senate. There's been a second round of expert panel contributors and witnesses to come in and talk about even just a national strategy for children and youth. It's not even legislation. It's not even a national commissioner. It's not even a national advocate, right? Because that's too scary. That's too much enforcement. That's too much accountability. There's no political will to do that. So if we just, wrap it up and call it a strategy, like that, what's that going to do? Right? So in the book, I actually pick out about 9 legislative approaches that if we change this in the criminal code of Canada, if we change this in our child protection legislation, if we change, like, kind of honing in and needling at, if we did these things, it would enshrine a commitment to young people in this country to have
Mm-hmm.
involvement in these decisions. And
Mm-hmm.
that would set the cultural and leadership tone that when it comes down to things like your local school trustee board,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Or your advisory committee in child protection services, to
Mm-hmm.
management about what's happening frontline, that those aren't tokenistic youth roles that are just
Mm-hmm.
plunked on those tables, and we look at one person and say, you now represent how many thousands of your peers? Speak for
Mm-hmm.
all of them, right? We don't do that to grown-ups, but
Mm-hmm.
we do it to young people,
Mm-hmm.
right? Why? And for every board who comes to me, every board of director or president or chair who's so proud and like, we have a youth rep on our board. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
great, that's so awesome. I'm glad you did that. Why don't you have 3?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And why isn't it, is it in your bylaws or is it a policy? Is it just because you are the chair and you decided to do
Right.
it? Or is it a
Mm-hmm.
policy of your board written
Mm-hmm.
into your bylaws that you will have 3 standing youth positions at all times filled with rotating terms, not cohorts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't cohort the rest of the board of directors, but we
Mm-hmm.
cohort young people, right? So
Mm-hmm.
where's the knowledge transfer? Where's the continuity? It's those gears turning over to think about in the structural accountability in our
Mm-hmm.
commitment to young people. Are we giving them the same dignity that we give adults?
Mm-hmm.
I've sat around too many tables where adults and professionals are debating how much of a stipend we're going to give the young person for attending a meeting. Right? Have we, like, raise your hand? We've all been there, right? Are we going to give them a gift card? Are we going to give them cash? Oh, we
Yeah.
can't trust them with cash. Okay, well, where
Right.
are we going to get the gift card to? And I just wait and I let the conversation happen. And then I say, and what have you been paid to be here?
Mm-hmm.
$500? Okay. So we're going to pay this young person $500 because that's what attending this meeting is valued at,
Mm-hmm.
right? And to me, it's a full stop. It's like, why is there any debate on
Why
this?
is there even a conversation about that? Yeah.
Why are we even having a conversation about giving them a $25 coffee card or like to a bookstore? Like, no, what?
Mm-hmm.
Makes no sense. Attending this meeting is a $500 value, therefore we pay the young person $500. End of story. Let's move on. Cut the check.
Mm.
I make a lot of friends, Andrew. Can you tell?
Hey, in this work, we want to be able to model for young people how to get stuff done, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that increases talk about possibility development. It's about like what you said earlier, Rachel, really well. Like it's often not enough. Some kids are different. But
Mhm.
most people, but especially kids, you do need to hold their hand. Sometimes I hear people say, "Oh, I have to hold their hand," in a kind of pejorative tone.
Mhm.
Maybe if we held each other's hands a little more,
Right?
maybe the world would be a little better place. And especially with young people, I think sometimes you can't just say, "Hey, do it." Sometimes you got to provide a little more guidance. And
Yep.
depending on the circumstance, you really got to put the ticket in their hand and say, "Here you
Mhm.
go." Um, it's all a judgment call, depending on the circumstance. Um, but I think we owe. I don't know about you, Rachel, or Altaf. I don't know about you, Urwan. I think you might be a different generation. No, just noticing, but I don't know about you guys, but I feel people in our generation, like a Gen X-ish generation here, that I feel like we owe our young people a lot for the state of the world, for what kind of challenges I feel like that spirit of reciprocity and giving back. I maybe that's just a personal ethic, but it'd be like you said, Rachel, it would be nice if we could keep things going to get these types of structural power, like you
Mhm.
said, embedded and more durable. Um,
Mhm.
that I think that's important for all of us here on this call, I would think.
For sure.
Um, Guys, I think you've been very generous with your time. I usually allow there's like a little sort of shadow ceiling of time until 12:30, and we're even over that. But that's a credit to you, Rachel, for inspiring us to have a very lively and passionate discussion and debate here. So, any final thoughts?
I appreciate the engagement. I absolutely, I'll in return, in reciprocity, put my plug in for the Global Possibility Network. Andrew, I think you do a great job of bringing what I feel these are very almost like intimate lunch and learns as the
Yeah.
monthly workshops.
Hmm.
And I think it's a great initiative that you take the time to bother to do as part of your role to bring us all together as a sector in many different ways. And I encourage those if you're on for the first time, I know there's others still that have cameras off, but if you're on for the first time, keep watching the emails, keep seeing the topics that are of interest and come back and join in any month. I love that there's sort of no strict attendance policy. If we miss a couple or we're busy one Friday, Andrew doesn't get mad at any of us. And just show up when you can and support each other any way possible. I think it's amazing networking that's here and great learning and sharing with each other. So thank you
Thank you,
everybody for your
Rachel.
time. Time is a huge
Absolutely.
gift. So
Yeah,
thank you.
no. It's our pleasure, honestly. So, speaking of, pleasure to meet all of you on the call. Thank you again, and thank you again to Rachel. Appreciate it. Have a good one, guys.
Have a good afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.